Hello and welcome to Let the Bird Fly, a podcast about living freely in a world given back to us. This is Wade here in the podcast studio, joined by my dear friend and colleague, the Reverend Dr. Michael Berg. We are without Jason again. I don't know if Jason still exists. I'm not going to lie. I believe he is vacationing in Minnesota. The last picture I saw was his feet in a boat, or as we say in Wisconsin, in a boat. And so I don't know if this is a perpetual vacation, what he has going on, but he will not be joining us today. On a similar note, we've really appreciated the listener feedback over the last few weeks and episodes. Jason has unfortunately not been able to be a part of them, but we've gotten very positive feedback, more than normal, about people enjoying the podcast. And so we do really appreciate that. We have had a bit of a rhythm going where we've been talking about churchier things, and we're going to break that up a little bit today. This is a request from a listener, and we always do love to get those. We have done some episodes based on listener input or questions. You're always free to email us. What is our email? podcast@letthebirdfly.com, I think. It's on the website, letthebirdfly.com. Or you can always Google us, our first name, last name, WLC. You'll get our email address. But we do appreciate getting that, and when we have opportunity, answering some of those. Some of those we get sometimes and we go, this is a little beyond us, or it would take more research than we can do right now, and we have them on the board to do down the road. Some of them we get and we go, we can do that right away. This was one of those, and we're going to be talking today about eschatology. And when we get to the main topic, we'll talk about what eschatology is. But eschatology is a fancy word for end things, final things. And we can talk about the different ways that we talk about that. This is always a big question in the church because each age of the church has thought this might be the age when Christ comes. And so eschatology is a good topic, and we were thankful that it was suggested to us. Michael, I want to commend you on the work on the studio. It's looking better every time. And when Michael goes to a view of me, you will see, as I noticed mid-episode for the episode we recorded right before this, he added the icon that we referenced in the Ordinary Time episode right there behind me. And so we're slowly decorating the wall. If you have ideas of things we should be doing, let us know. But thank you, Michael, for all you're doing to make our studio a wonderful place to be.
Yeah, and I did, between this episode and last episode, did some camera angles a little bit, so it's not perfect, but
Yeah, I noticed I'm a little
you're a
higher
little bit
up.
higher.
I'm exalted.
Yeah. You are really white compared to Jesus, though.
Well, he was from Palestine
So
or
it's a
Israel, whatever we're
very
supposed to
good
call
distinction
it. Yeah.
that you are definitely not.
All right. But on that note, I was in Florida, flew down to Florida. I'd have to take my shirt off to do this well. Flew down to Florida, and then I was driving to Michigan to see my parents. Drove to Michigan and back, and I'm the son of a truck driver. So when you drive, you have your arm out the window. Remind me, I will take my shirt off after the episode, Michael. I have a beater on under this, or whatever we're supposed to call it now. That doesn't seem very political correct. My right side right here is just all red. And then here is all pasty white. So if you really want to see a contrast,
Okay.
that would be the contrast. I will remind our listeners before we have our disclaimer too, please do think about subscribing on YouTube. That would help us a lot. We are going to have regular videos up there. We have video and audio for each episode, so you can still get the audio on your favorite podcatcher. But the video will also be up on YouTube unless we mess something up. We've only had real major technical difficulties in one. And so the episode on Ordinary Time, there was about 6 minutes I had to take out, put it together. There's a 30-minute gap where there's silent, 30-second gap where there's silence, but it worked out pretty well. Otherwise, that was just where we explained the meaning of life. Unfortunately, that's been lost. I don't remember what it was. But please do think about subscribing on YouTube. And then if you haven't already, you can subscribe on your favorite podcatcher. Rate, review, that goes a long way. That games the algorithm so that we pop up if someone's searching for something. 5 stars is great. Ignore Michael if he does his 4-star shtick. 5 stars is wonderful and greatly appreciated, but think about rating, reviewing there. You can also share on social media. We usually get the episodes up on Facebook. Michael, would you be so kind as to give us our disclaimer, and I will lightly play our music in the background.
This show doesn't speak for our churches or church bodies or our employers. To be honest, much of the time it probably doesn't speak for us. We will be thinking out loud a lot. So approach what you hear with a healthy skepticism, because, well, as a responsible resident of planet Earth, that's probably what you should generally do with almost everything. If you find yourself getting too worked up, tune out, look around, and realize you were just listening to a podcast. That's right, a podcast. So go live free, friends, and don't let us get in the way.
You read that well. I feel like you emphasized certain parts.
It's my profession.
You're a good lector.
It's the only thing I know how to do.
Yeah. Well, I was impressed.
Thanks.
Anything you want to share before we go to the main topic, Michael?
Oh, I have a public service announcement. You ready? Okay.
I need to hit mute this, or this is okay.
It's okay. All right. This is a public service announcement. A PSA. When you go to a baseball game,
oh boy, I know how to do that.
you go to a baseball game, and there's a runner on first, and the pitcher throws over to first. Do not boo. Everybody boos.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the past, this was, it was fine. I mean, it didn't make a whole lot of sense because there's many reasons a pitcher would throw over to first. And if you're the home team...
I'm going to start the music again now that this is going well.
And your time, if you're the home team and it's your guy on first base and the opposing pitcher throws over, in the past you booed. Now, that didn't make a whole lot of sense because there's a lot of reasons why it's advantageous for the runner on first to have the pitcher throw over. You got under his skin.
I'm going to slowly increase the volume.
You're in his mind, right? He's wasting effort. He
Anybody know
throw it away.
the Brewers
But now
recently
listen.
played the Cardinals?
Now listen.
And Michael was at the game,
Listen.
although he didn't sit with the third floor group.
Now listen. I accept that in the past because you're like, oh, the pitcher's not keeping the game going.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things you just did. Boo, hiss, whatever. That's fine. But the rules have changed. And this is why I think we need a public service announcement. The rules have changed because a pitcher can only disengage twice per batter. And if he throws over to first, that's a disengagement off the rubber. His foot is off the pitching rubber. And then if he does that twice and he does it a third time and he doesn't pick off the runner, that runner gets to go to second. So that means that after a guy throws over twice, that runner on first can probably take an extra lead. He can take an extra longer lead, right? Because he knows if that guy throws over, he has to pick him off. So it is to your advantage if the pitcher throws over to first base. So don't boo that. You should silently
really
clap
loud right
that.
Thank you, Michael. I just noticed I had myself muted, hopefully not for the whole beginning, so we might have to go back and record. I did get your whole rant, though, so that will be good, but we will double-check that. Hopefully I just muted myself for a moment, but we'll stop the music now, and our main topic is eschatology. And eschatology just means end times things in theology. So this can be my end, my death. This can be the end of the world. It can apply in a variety of things. And so, Michael, why don't you introduce what we're going to be talking about with eschatology while we're talking about it, any stuff like that?
Yeah, so eschaton just means the end. And so eschatology is a big portion of theology, a discipline of theology. So heaven, hell, Jesus' return, what's going to happen between Jesus' ascension and sending the Pentecost to the end. All of that could be end time stuff. But what we specifically are going to talk about today, and what normally we think about when we throw around the word eschatology, is when's Jesus going to come and what's going to happen, right? The resurrection of the dead, separation of the goats and the sheep, that sort of thing. Now, this is true of all time, and it's also true of every religion, that people get a little obsessed about what's the end going to be like. And reasonably so. We'd kind of like to know what's going to happen. Although a side note is, if you did know when the end was going to happen, or if you knew the future, that would actually be a colossal burden upon yourself, and it would ruin you. So the example I like to use is, if you knew that the end of the world was coming in 2028, and so you're like, well, what's my bucket list?
I would hope that all of my sports teams would go all in.
Yeah.
they would just trade all their draft picks if they need it and spend as big as possible.
But that's the problem.
That'd be the only time I would be for going just completely all in.
Who is going to trade the draft picks if they know that it's coming at 2000?
Everyone knows?
Yes, everyone knows.
Okay.
Yeah.
I hope not the Dodgers at least.
So this is the problem, is if we all knew.
The Dodgers treat every season like they know.
and they in your bucket list is, I want to go to Australia. Who's flying you there? Who's going to work? Right? Who's planning for the future? And so this actually
not Kirk Cameron, because he's not here anymore at this point, probably.
Purely, this is a divine-sized burden upon shoulders, and so it's actually a gift that God has not told us when, right? So, but I understand the instinct, like you'd like to know. We are gossipy people. We want to be in the know. And so it's a very natural sort of thing. It's also very natural for human beings to want to participate in great things. And so we'd like to participate in the hustling up of this end times. We are also human beings that would like to have some sort of triumphal utopia here on earth. And what we mean by utopia is we rule and everybody else is subservient. And so these are natural things that we see in humanity in general. We see this in religion. We also see it in secular movements as well, right? This is going to be the new age. This is going to be the time. And so it's a natural desire to have that. When it comes to like the broad sense in religion, what often happens is there is a small but usually very loud and powerful portion of each religion that thinks they know the end times, and they think that they know how to hasten it, and the end result is their God coming down and kicking butt universally over the world. This is true in some forms of Judaism, although I don't think it's true so much in modern Judaism. You see this in Christianity. You see this in Islam. You even see it in some of the so-called pacifist religions like Hinduism and Buddhism. And so this is very dangerous, because when you try to hustle up your God, then the ends can often justify the means. And eventually you are going to get involved in politics and maybe even in warfare, right? Notice that all of this really has to do with law. So if we...
Often because it has to do with power.
If we behave appropriately, if certain political things occur, if in Christianity, if the church starts acting more like the church, this will hasten Jesus' return. And from that sort of desire spins out of misinterpretations of scriptural passages. And it really does, I would say it affects geopolitics more than maybe we always appreciate on a day-to-day level. And sometimes Christians who would like to see the world not be sinful and have a very healthy desire for the gospel to spread can be taken over by these movements that definitely have a political or military sort of aspect to them or plan to them. So that's the overall broad thing, but I'd like to get not into the weeds of so much all of the different passages, but I would like to get into the weeds of Christian eschatology and how that kind of gets people going sideways sometimes.
Can I set the stage just briefly? Yep. So again, I want to stress, it is good and right and salutary that Christians of every age expect the return of Christ. That in Advent they pray from their heart, "Come, Lord Jesus, come." It is also good and right and salutary that Christians know the scriptures and be aware of their surroundings. And so every age of the church has been able to look at the world and say, some of the things Jesus talked about, they're happening, or they have happened. Luther has often been called apocalyptic because he saw a lot of end things on the horizon or happening, including the battle with the Antichrist, right, with the papacy. as he called the papacy the Antichrist. Um, this is something that isn't a bad thing to expect Jesus' return and be ready, but this is something that can become a bad thing if it becomes paralyzing or if it becomes the predominant focus of your life is just wait. The Thessalonians Paul has to write to and be like, go to work.
Hmm.
Yes, Jesus might come soon, but go to work. And so this is an area where we want to have proper balance. And so Christians should live in light of the end. That is how we are called to live because we live in the light of our hope. And yet, that doesn't mean a sad life. That doesn't mean an angry life. That doesn't mean there's a need for power struggle or withdraw. All that simply means is that we're living on borrowed time. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. And so Luther was supposedly once asked, and I can't find where he said this, but in Eisenach or Eisleben, I can't remember, they do have it inscribed in stone. So it must be true because the German government would never put that on a tourist site if it wasn't true, right? That Luther was supposedly asked what he would do if he knew the world was ending tomorrow, and he said, I would plant a tree or fly people to Australia.
Hmm.
And so you can tell this is out of balance in the church when people don't care at all about Jesus' return, when they live as though Christ isn't coming back and there will always be this perpetual tomorrow. My grandma used to say, if you want to make the angels laugh, tell them what you're doing tomorrow. Um, but the other ditch is that Christians' behavior is driven by an unhealthy view of the end, um, which leads to paralysis or sinful scheming, right? And you mentioned law, and yes, law often because of morality, but also power
Hmm.
plays, right? As if Jesus isn't going to come until we do this political thing or we achieve this power thing, or like the world becomes bad enough. And so we just approach the world as if we want it to burn. Here, I think this is somewhere where Dietrich Bonhoeffer is very helpful, where he says there's no part of the world into which Christ didn't come and die for. In other words, there will be a new heavens and a new earth, and any person you see is not only someone who's been created in the image of God, but someone for whom Christ died. And he, church and state, we can separate them out, but Christ came into church and state. He had a church and a state trial. And so you can have the impulse, well, we're just going to completely withdraw and watch it burn. And like there's almost a joy in that that's unhealthy. Or like we're going to help hasten things. And this plays out in America. And I'll stop after this, and this won't become the episode. This plays out in America, and we're seeing it play out now. Um, when I have friends who are not from the U.S. and they watch U.S. news, the prominence of how often Israel comes up in U.S. news, they're often surprised by, and often historically how pro-Israel America is. And I'm not talking about Jews. I'm talking about the modern state of Israel. Um, but there's a reason for that in American politics that isn't purely political. Sometimes it is because, well, Israel is a democracy, they're a Western economy, et cetera, et cetera. But sometimes it is this dispensationalist view or this millennial view that kind of, you know, things have to be prepared for Christ's return. Part of that is the conversion of the Jews, perhaps, or whatever else someone else is viewing it as. And that absolutely does play into politics. And you have a contingent of voters for whom that is a very important issue. Now, again, we're not getting into the politics or what U.S. support for Israel should or shouldn't be, the pluses or minuses of how Israel, the modern state, conducts itself. And I'm talking again about the modern state. But this is something we can see play out in real time. The same as currently with the conflict with Iran. Well, there is a Kilialism, as the reformers would have called it, or millennialism, in Shiite
Hmm.
um, theology as well, where there is this view of how things will end. And sometimes in, I shouldn't say Iranian in the sense of historically Persia, Iran, um, but the regime in Iran has been very much influenced by this. A big one who was influenced by it, I hope I say his name right, was Ahmadinejad back in
Hmm.
the day. And so these different views of the end definitely do color how people approach politics as well. So should we be super involved? Should we withdraw? Should we be paralyzed? Um, you know, no. We should plant a tree or fly a plane to Australia. But I'll now throw it to you to dial in on these things more in
Yeah.
detail.
So while you were talking, I was thinking like there seems to be not much room for a middle ground in our certain contexts. One is, and I don't mean like totally dismissing that Christ is going to return, but I do not think about Christ coming back as much as people in the past. Like, there, maybe even go so far as to say that the majority of Christians in the past believed that it was a strong possibility that Christ would come in their age.
In their lifetime, yeah.
And I've never really thought that. I mean, maybe, like, kind of be nice. But at the same time, we live in an optimistic time, or at least we grew up in an optimistic time, that, I just assumed that I would have children and grandchildren. I just assumed that I would be buried sometime. I didn't think, there's a strong possibility that Christ would return. And the opposite side, as you said before, is like, this is the time, right? And it's still, it's a twisted optimism.
And you can have that, by the way. I'm sorry, I'll be quick with this. You can have this without Christ too. We live in a modern America where many people see, you mentioned, when we were growing up, things were optimistic. This will get better, this will get better, this will get better. And people are starting to think things are getting worse. And so you get these various dystopias, and dystopian fictions, very popular, movies, etc. But, there's going to be nuclear war, there's going to be economic collapse, there's going to be environmental disaster. Well, that is still sometimes becomes like a millennial or Achilles type view. It's just it doesn't have Christ in it.
Right.
So many people we encounter in our daily life are wrestling with these things too, but without Christ. There are people we meet who do think the world might end in their lifetime. But the hubris behind it is that it's completely man-centered, right? And it forgets that man will never end the world. Man might become increasingly wicked, but it will ultimately rest with God. Sorry for that interruption.
Yeah, no, so you see this in every sort of movement that has a component in it that is apocalyptic. Like, just the fact that when I say post-apocalyptic or apocalypse or whatever, most educated people know exactly what we mean, even though it's a pretty rare term, right? And so not only that, but maybe two components that are similar to a millennialistic movement in any religion. I'm using the word millennialism. It's only a Christian thing or a Jewish thing, but applying it to everything else. Two components are one is that there are times that you can read the times. So there's eras. This is the new era, we're moving into an era. And that's fine. I do that all the time as well, but not with an idea of like, okay, this is the end. You also then will say, if you get really worked up about this and are fearful of this, it's power versus power. So here's the extreme danger for specifically Christians in America is, again, the ends justify the means. We have to fight power with power. And that then you're in the realm of the law, and the law, if it's just about power and law, everybody loses. And over again, the theme in the Bible is the gospel and the love, and submissive love wins the day. But that's just so hard for us to understand. And so you also see then, like, if this is going to be about power, I'm stepping out of the kingdom of the right hand and stepping into the kingdom of the left hand, and in some way or form, either asking the left hand kingdom to do right hand church stuff, or to say the church should act a little bit more like the left-handed kingdom. And if you think I'm being ridiculous, I mean, there are churches that will fund military operations, right? They will fund militaries.
Just watch some of the advertisements on cable news that are clearly targeted at Christians and Christian millennial concerns. But I will say, just to reiterate, I do think we live in an age of competing millennialisms that are either Christless or Christ is in them but misunderstood. And something that's interesting is you find Christians whose politics are driven by millennial concern having to align with people who have different millennial concerns in opposition to people who have different millennial concerns. I do think that's been a shift from when we grown up, is that we have a lot of people who are going to move to Canada if the next election goes this way or that, because America is done. And a lot of people who think the world is done if America is done. or that, again, environmental collapse, economic collapse, nuclear dystopia. Um, there are these competing millennial views. And here's where I think Lutherans, as amillennials, have a particular voice that could be contributed of sanity, of, well, let's step back and live in the light of this. And I think it's also helpful that we remember as Christians, we exist in time. And so we're always trying to like measure this out and predict it. God exists outside of time. And so even in the Old Testament, when the prophets are speaking something, they're often using the prophetic perfect. They're speaking as if it's already happened, as if it's already done in God. The plot is there. We're largely doing improv within the plot. But in God, all things are complete, are full. We are living in a linear fashion, and I think there's a comfort in that for the Christians as well that ought to take pressure off of us. But I'm going to step back now for a bit because I know you have notes that you want to make your way through.
And so maybe this would be a good time to like get some definitions. So amillennialism, which you referenced, is what I'll say what Lutherans believe. It's what the church normally believes, right? We're not saying like this is a particular denominational thing, and has been the standard within the church for all of time. And that's not to say that people were not urgent about this, or they thought that this particular sign pointed to maybe their time. But what they meant by amillennialism is this is a symbolic time. So millennium is not million, it's 1,000, comes from Latin, mille, like milliliter. And this is from Revelation, where there is this age where Satan is bound, but he's still active. Christ rules, and then at the end, Christ will return, and there will be the last judgment. Now, if you're reading apocalyptic literature, then by definition, you're in a place where you're not going to take numbers literally, right? There's going to be images here.
And that's what Mike means there is, this is how apocalyptic literature in the Bible intends to be read. Mm-hmm. This is how St. John in Revelation, this is not, he's not saying, oh, the Bible, you can't take it literally here because it's unreliable. He's saying this is how the Bible was written to be understood. So 144,000 isn't necessarily, there will only be 144,000 in heaven. We're not saying that this doesn't apply to all of Scripture, but apocalyptic literature as a genre of, is that fair to say?
Oh, absolutely.
Just to make sure that we're...
Yeah, and you always...
We're not saying when Jesus feeds 5,000, there weren't 5,000.
Yeah. And that's, by the way, this is how we do regular day life. If I read a legal document, I'm expecting it to say something that is very clear so that there's no ambiguity. If I write a love letter, then I'm expecting to find symbolism there. And so what genre you're in, you have to ask that question. And so just the picking and choosing of which numbers you want to be literal and which numbers you don't want to is it's a little bit problematic, of course. So this 1,000-year reign is Christ ruling here, but we're just talking about the New Testament era. We're just talking about after Christ's ascension and sending the Pentecost to us last time. Now, the idea of rule, right, is very attractive, right? And so what we're thinking about from a human point of view is, well, you rule the world, you rule the culture, you rule the governments.
Which is what the people who rejected Christ expected the Messiah to be like. Yeah. It's precisely why he was rejected.
Right. But we know that, knowing the theology of the cross, by the way, that what I see is not always what God sees and what is accurate. I have to go with what he says. And he says he rules. And everything's going to be okay. And I got to go by faith there, even if my candidate didn't win, right? And by the way, the New Testament writers would have never even dreamed of a time, never been on the wildest dreams that they're like, I don't think, there's no indication that they're like, man, if we just had a Christian emperor, then everything would be okay, right? Of course, you don't get that for until Constantine anyway. And even then that comes with problems, right? So it is putting often, not always, because as I said at the beginning, there's always been this impulse. It's a very human thing in every time, but it's a very modern thing. So after Reformation, Renaissance until now, it's a very modern thing to say power, control, utopia, better. And so the modern sort of millennialism takes on a different form than you see, let's say, in the 1200s in France or something like that. So that's the first thing. What we have to deal with is what does the millennium mean? Now, there's other versions of people, what they think is going to happen. One is the post-tribulational premillennialism. Actually, let's start with postmillennialism first.
Can
Go
I
ahead.
share a fun story?
Yep.
So in the previous episode, I talked about going to MLC to tour it before I went up there for college. That's our worker training college. And a friend of mine who's now a non-denominational pastor, which again means Baptist, went with me, and we saw the Luther statue, the bronze statue, and he said, "Oh, I knew it. You pray to him, don't you?" And I joked about that in the last episode. But he came up and visited us at Mequon at our seminary when he was in seminary, and he was down at DTS, Dallas Theological Seminary. And so when he came up, he was like the Baptist on campus. And so he got all sorts of questions of these Wells Lutherans who were curious about this guy studying to be a Baptist pastor. When I went down, I was the Lutheran on campus, and I also got those questions. And almost all of them were about this. And they would say, "Are you pre-trib or post-trib?"
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, "Oh, we're amillennial." And their mind was just, what? Like, what in the world? And so what Michael's going into, to Lutheran ears, this might sound like not very familiar to us or not that important. There are segments of American Christianity where this is one of the first things you're going to ask each other to figure out what kind of Christian you are.
Yep. And you can see that just by the amount of literature produced in the Protestant world on this, and pretty paltry when it comes to Lutheranism. That is not to say, by the way, that there was not Lutherans who flirted with this and still do.
There were debates in American Lutheranism about this,
So postmillennialism, broad sort of thing, but it's basically saying the millennium is going to start, and after that, then Christ will return. So Christ is going to return after the millennium. Now, what's interesting about this is usually this comes from this idea that things are going to get better, right? That Christianity during this time of the millennium is really people are going to be converted.
This is like the modern optimistic view.
Yeah, very optimistic. The world is going to be converted. It's going to become Christian. And it doesn't take a big logical leap to go, and then the culture and the politics will follow.
Yep.
Right. Okay. Then you have premillennialism, which is to say Christ returns, and then there's the millennium, and then he comes, and then there's the last judgment. So a post-tribulational premillennialism is that there's a tribulation, Christ comes, it's going to kick butt for a while, 1,000 years in fact, and then there'll be the last judgment. Pre-tribulational dispensational premillennialism is that there is going to be the rapture of the church. Christ is going to come. You're not going to see it unless you know.
We'll both still be here probably, Michael.
And then there's the tribulation. Then Christ comes with the church. And this one you really do kick butt for 1,000 years, and then the last judgment. So you can already see, if you're familiar with the New Testament, some passages that they can pick out, right? So in Thessalonians, Paul's going to tell you, the context of Thessalonians is, as you said before, go to your job.
Yeah, live your life.
And so people are going to, they're going to be taken up. Rapture is taken up. The believers are going to go, and then the people are going to be left. The unbelievers are going to be left here. And so some will take that to like, we're all going to be driving cars, and then there's going to be driverless cars.
This is the Left Behind books and movies, yeah.
So, growing up in California, this is where you'll find quite a bit of this stuff. And remember bumper stickers that would say, "Warning: in case of tribulation, this will be the rapture. This will be driverless car." And heard of
that was before Teslas.
Yeah, I heard of. So
now, if you think you're going to get raptured, you should buy a Tesla.
Buy a Tesla, yeah. Some entrepreneurial.
That should be Elon Musk should be like official car of the rapture.
Yeah. Some young men who wanted to make some money, quick bucks, some entrepreneurs, started a company that said, we will take care of your pet after the rapture, right, for a fee, right?
Your heathen pet that isn't getting raptured.
And so, I mean, awesome, right?
Yeah.
But the misinterpreting Paul's point here, right? He's just saying, listen, you don't plan. Go to your job tomorrow because it's going to happen like that, and there's going to be a separation.
You're really good at doing that sound. I can't do that like that.
And so that's one area where there's a problem. So we don't want to get into the weeds of all of these different versions and passages. What I do want to talk about here is two things. One is that in this way of thinking, very often Israel remains separate from the church. And we'll come back to that.
And by Israel, you mean modern state?
Modern state Israel.
Or Israel as the people of God, right? That we'll flesh that out. But just because modern Americans hear Israel and they think of the modern state of Israel. So don't take that as a given as Michael goes here.
Let's just do that right now since we brought it up. So when Paul talks about Israel in the New Testament, almost always, at least in a broad sense, right, he is talking about those who believe. You're the sons and daughters of Abraham because you're believers. Yeah. And so all of Israel is going to be saved. Well, just saying God's people are going to be saved. If you keep that separate and either think about it as ethnic Jewish people or the modern state post 1948 Israel, then you're stuck with this idea that the Jewish people, whether ethnically or the Israeli with an I, that's not Israelite but Israeli, a modern citizen of Israel, must be converted to Christianity. Or you sort of say, well, Judaism is still sort of the family of believers, and so
like
they don't
the dispensationalist is going to let some of the Israelis go to heaven without faith in Jesus.
It's not about Christ. And so now you have problems with all sorts of different passages. Right?
So when you say separate Israel from the church, what you mean is Israel becomes either the modern state or it becomes the Jewish ethnic group.
And that something has to happen with that segment of people in order for Jesus to return, or that's going to happen before Jesus returns. What is interesting, and you see this in other religions as well, is if I'm waiting for this to happen, shouldn't I try to enhance that happen? Shouldn't I hasten this? And so instead,
which is Saul in the Old Testament trying to help God along too, and it never works out well.
And so, yeah, good thought there. Like the theme of like we're helping God's promises.
Abraham and Sarah trying to help it along, and then you get Ishmael.
And so, if I can get to this political reality or cultural reality, then this will hasten what. And if you do believe that, yeah, that seems to make, or at the very least, you are going to vote and you're going to think and you're going to donate to causes that are pro this happening rather than this not happening. Mm-hmm. And a part of that is that the Holy Land, right, would be occupied politically by certain people, whether it be the Israeli government, by ethnic Jews, by Christians, whatever it is. And so this is a prime example of religion then influence not just politics, but geopolitics, right? And you had mentioned before, up until, this was something that happened in our lifetime generally, although the seeds were there in the 1960s with Malcolm X and others. But it was very hard to get elected in the United States to any governmental position unless you were pro-Israel. Because it was a democracy, because it was a Western culture, Western culture and Western nation in the middle of the Middle East, which has ramifications for us business-wise, military-wise, CIA-wise, politically-wise. But there was enough of like, why should we care? That it could have been a divided thing, but it wasn't. And I think largely it was because you had a strong Protestant, and I would say eventually like 1970s and after, an evangelical love of the Jewish people specifically because of this eschatological understanding, right?
And even if people didn't fully understand that's why they had that view, they were informed or shaped by people who did have that point of view.
There's plenty of literature out there that talks about this weird sort of like, why do these white conservatives really like these Jewish people living in, Manhattan, right? These should be politically opposite, and there's tension there, of course,
Yeah.
and anti-Semitism and stuff, of course. But like, it's sort of it's a very unique thing. And to your point about how the rest of the world goes, why are you so concerned about this very, very actually small numbers-wise, but significant politically group of people? Well, partly, it's not the only thing, because you have the Holocaust and you have the uniqueness of the Jewish story, and from our point of view, spiritually unique. But it's still outsized in its cultural importance and political importance. And part of the reason, not the only reason, part of the reason is because of this, let's just say, generally Baptist eschatological issue.
Yep.
And this is not to say all Baptists believe. We're not saying that, right? The Baptists are a large tent, right? Okay. So the dispensation, by the way, we should address that for a little bit. Dispensation just means kind of like an era or a time. And so sometimes you hear about 7 eras or dispensations. And I don't want to throw people under the bus here, because we talk about that all the time, intellectual history. What we're not saying is we can predict the future, we can learn from the past, we can be prepared for the future, but we're not, I don't think either of us are like, this is God doing this specifically and then that this is going to happen. But the 7 dispensations are the dispensation of innocence. This is Genesis 1 until the fall, so Genesis 1, 2, and early 3. Then the age of conscience, which is after the fall to the flood. Then the age of government, right? So after the flood, you have a time where the earth seems to be ruled through sort of secular, they wouldn't use that word, of course, but we would, sort of secular governments. And then after the promise in Genesis 12 to Abraham, this is the time of promise until you get to Moses, and that's the time of law, where it is now you have the 10 Commandments and you have Leviticus, you have the law, right? There's no, it's not just conscience, it's or natural law. It's actually a written, revealed law. And then you have the age of the church, which is the age of grace. We can debate when that starts. Was it start with Jesus, or does it start with in Acts chapter 2, the church? But this is the time we live in. And then the 7th age that is coming, is this millennial kingdom, however that looks like. Now, if you believe, if you're caught into this idea that is not a theology of the cross, right-hand kingdom, Christ rules in your hearts, that doesn't necessarily always match up with the last election or the culture, then you understand that God has always ruled, will always rule. We already have it. We just live in this particular time, and we wait in faith and trust. But if you think that this is going to have ramifications to the world, which it does, but specific ramifications politically and culturally, where you can tell, okay, this is coming, this is not. Well, it doesn't take long for people to start predicting times. And so throughout history, mainline Christians, what I mean by mainline is not some kook that's started his own church, but people from legitimate, like Methodists, even Lutherans, would predict a certain time. Now, this did happen in the medieval age as well, right? But we usually with a different sort of idea.
And even Luther dabbled a little bit in this weird creature was born, whatever else.
Now, in the modern world, it's almost always tied to politics. So, and you can understand why, like, especially like World War I and World War II, like, we don't understand. Even if you lived in America in 1918, you did not understand the horrors unless you were in Verdun, unless you were in, on the ground there. And so you could understand that people are like, something's happening. This is different. This is new. This may be the end. So there was predictions around there. There's predictions in the 1800s. There's predictions after World War II. And this sort of seeps in even into regular day Christians' conversations. I remember in my vicar year in the Bible Belt, we had a good family. But this guy was convinced about the locust and Joel were at the helicopters of Vietnam. And at that time, he was now talking about the Middle East, and the Antichrist was going to be Saddam Hussein or whatever. I mean, there is no person in the last, I would guess, 100 years that took control and was a tyrant that was not tied some way, somehow to the Antichrist. And that some big event, whether it be nuclear war, whether it be World War I, World War II, Vietnam, or whatever, someone is not tied to, that's it.
Well, and even with U.S. presidents, I think in parish ministry, there hasn't been a U.S. president in my time as a pastor where at some point a member or a visitor or someone at church told me this or that president was the Antichrist.
Yeah. Or the opposite, this is God's chosen person,
right?
And this is going to usher in a new
which
era.
Can be just as dangerous.
Right. Now, this sounds all sort of negative end times talk, but people who are into this are actually quite optimistic about humanity, that we can do this, we can hasten this to come, and that there will be this rule. The danger for us today is to, instead of read the times and say, repent, settle down, know that God is in control. We've been through worse. Here's the eternal perspective God has given us in his revelation. And I do know this, that there will be a resurrection of the dead, and that should spur me on to go do my vocation, tell my neighbors about Christ, not in a weird, Kennedy way, like, if God came tonight, where are you going to go?
Right.
To know that God's going to get his people into heaven, instead of this reading the signs so that you can predict the end. Now, you may not say,
Which
I'm not
precisely what Jesus says not to do. Yeah.
You say, I'm not predicting a day or time. Okay, good for you. But if you're using politics to say this, that, and the other thing, you're pretty darn close. And it just amazes me when you look.
It's like Jesus talks about observing the seasons. This would be as silly as me thinking that fall's not going to come until I do, that I can hasten the coming of autumn.
Yeah. So maybe 2 points to sort of wrap up here. It is amazing to me how many Christians, and not just ones that end up being like, start their own cult, like Russell or Joseph Smith, but people from like legitimate, like Lutheran, Methodist, whatever, will give a date when Jesus clearly said that you're not going to know the day or time. I don't even know the day or time. It's an interesting question that leads me to believe that the desire to know and the desire, it's the same thing with Adam and Eve with the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The desire to know and be in the know and predict this is so strong that you can literally, there are some passages where we can debate, are you going against the word of, this one's like literally
right.
You're doing exactly what God said
right.
you could not do. It's bonkers crazy. The other thing that maybe we should leave upon is put your optimism in the right place. And your optimism just cannot be in something where God clearly said, and every indication tells you that this is not where you should put your optimism, and that is in the culture or in the politics. And don't fall in the trap of power versus power, because everybody's going to lose. So I'll give you the last word on this. If you're looking for utopia on earth, you are going to be not only largely disappointed, but you're going to fall into the temptation. Not saying that you take the next step, but the temptation of the only way we can solve this problem is with power.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're going to end up bitter. Um, I will say, just to go back to something that we mentioned at the beginning, eschatology also embraces my own personal end things, my own death, right? If the end of all things doesn't come before I die, I will still have an end. Well, Christ has given me something to prepare for my personal end and for the end times, and that's one and the same thing. I think Christians are pretty good about recognizing what God has given to prepare us for my personal end time, my death, but they don't connect that to the last day. And that is God has given me word and sacrament. In baptism, I've already died. I always think it'd be a great line, like a Terminator line, to say to the devil, "You can't kill me. I've already died." Um, I've been buried and raised with Christ. And now I have the word of Christ that is the ultimate word. It's the final word. It's the word through which I will live forever, which is the gospel word. And then I have the Lord's Supper with all those saints who have gone before me, those Thessalonians who died in faith and are now in heaven, um, are with the Lord. I'm part of the communion of saints, and when I participate in that supper, I'm getting the appetizer, the foretaste for the feast to come. I am being prepared for the last things. And so these are often the last places we turn when we're concerned with the end times, but they're meant to be the first place that we ought to turn. How do I get ready for my personal end and for the end of all things? By being with Christ, who is the same yesterday and today and tomorrow, being with Christ, who will come on the last day to judge the living and the dead. And Christ has promised to be there with me and for me in holy baptism and holy absolution, in the holy scriptures, and in holy communion. And this then sets me free to go plant the tree. This then sets me free to do the flight to Australia so people can cross things off their bucket list. And so there's a joy to a millennialism, even though it sounds like the boring option because we don't have, you can't make nearly as good of movies about it or write as many books. But there's a joy to it. I am set free to live today as today because I know tomorrow will be whatever tomorrow is meant to be. I know that my days are in the Lord's hands and He's counted the hairs of my head. And this sets me free from having to make power plays. This sets me free from having to scheme. And this sets me free, most importantly, from idolatrous fear. And by idolatrous fear, I mean fear that does not proceed from faith. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of all wisdom, but that fear is faith. This sets me free from faithless fear because I know that whatever the devil or the world or history might throw at me, I have a Christ who's broken into that and will deliver me one day from it. And so whenever you find the end times kind of like hovering as a gray cloud, we're doing it wrong. The Advent prayer, "Come Lord Jesus, come," is a joyous prayer. This is not a terrified prayer. And in the meanwhile, I've been given time in my vocations to strive to see my children, my neighbors, my family, and others with me, with Christ in eternity. And so I have a friend who, he probably got it from elsewhere, but he would often say, if you want to find someone's idol, follow their fear. And I think the various millennial views do reveal the fears people have. Even the need to like have this 1,000-year reign, it often is like an opportunity for score settling, or it's an opportunity for the church that has been humiliated to now everybody will see that how important the church is.
It's power.
Right. And that's not what it needs to be about. This time of grace that we've been given is a time to enjoy in freedom and a time to enjoy with neighbor, but also a time to make sure that that ultimate word gets to as many people as possible. I'm guessing if anyone gets upset about this episode, if we ask them why they're upset, it will pretty quickly lead to politics or fears unrelated to what Scripture actually says. And that's always a time to step back. I have a personal view of how the world will end, and I do this shtick in presentations all the time. I think the Lions will be in the Super Bowl. and they'll be up like 14, and there'll be 30 seconds on the clock. All they have to do is kneel, and the clock is going down 7, 6, 5, and I'd like to think it's Jared Goff, but we'll see. Maybe it's 20 years down the road. And just as he's about to kneel, and it will go in the record books. The Detroit Lions have won the Super Bowl. Christ will come. And you know how I think I'll feel in that moment, Michael? I think I'll kind of chuckle and say, really, Jesus? Really, Jesus? But the time will come when we least expect it. And it will probably come in a way that some of the stuff you really think needs to happen or is most important won't happen. But it will also come in a way that will completely cast all those things aside, because it will be a new heavens and a new earth, and will be free from all the things that consume us and so easily drag us into these views that really need to be imported into Scripture. And I will say are often very Western and American. They come out of an age where Europeans thought this all depended on Europe, or especially now with dispensationalism, out of an age where we think, what would the Lord do without America? And it's a wonderful thing to be free from that.
Yeah, I'll end it with this. It is a very American thing, right? Futuristic, optimistic. The language for American history has been this is the new Zion, this is the new place, this is new, this is manifest destiny. All of these words, and when that starts to crumble, the temptation is to not look to Christ, but to look to your nation and build it up. And because over and over again, everybody who's predicted that this would happen, when that crumbles, they got two choices: to say, oops, I was wrong, or to go down with the ship and build up this, whatever they thought was going to be the thing that would save humanity. And I think there's quite a few people living under that burden. And so I think you and I would say, hey, God's in control. Don't worry about this. Instead, live your life and let the bird fly. For the record.
Oh, he was happy with what we said? Although he probably would have liked if we talked a little bit more about if any weird creatures had been born lately.
Yeah, at first.
Like a cow with two heads or something.
Well, he's in heaven now. If he was still on earth, he'd be like, sort of. He'd be like, kind of. But now he's like, I'm not drunk, I'm just a